My mother pushed me into oncoming cars while 6 months pregnant for not leaving my marriage. You pushed me into the street. I'm 6 months pregnant. You should have thought about that before you defied me. If you won't leave Brandon, then maybe losing that baby will teach you some respect. Mom, there are cars. I don't care. My mother pushed me into oncoming traffic while I was 6 months pregnant because I refused to leave my husband. Hi, I'm Charlotte. Today, I'm going to tell you my story. But before I continue, please like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories like this. I never imagined my own mother would try to kill me and my unborn child. But that's exactly what happened on a busy downtown street corner when I was 28 years old and carrying my first baby. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Charlotte Hoffman, and I grew up in Portland with my parents, Gregory and Helen, and my older brother Travis. From the outside, we looked picture perfect. Dad worked as a civil engineer, Mom ran a successful interior design business, and Travis was the golden child who could do absolutely no wrong. Me? I was the daughter who never quite lived up to expectations. Mom had this suffocating obsession with control. She dictated what I wore, who I befriended, what extracurriculars I participated in. When I was 16, she forced me to quit the volleyball team because she disliked one of the coaches. When I got accepted to University of California at 18, she convinced me to stay local and attend community college instead, insisting she needed me close by. I was too young and too conditioned to refuse her. Looking back now, the pattern is crystal clear. Every friendship I formed, Mom discovered some fatal flaw. Brooke was too rebellious. Kayla came from a divorced household. Morgan wore too much eyeliner. One by one, my friendships withered because enduring Mom's relentless criticism and surprise drop-ins was exhausting whenever I tried spending time with anyone. She weaponized guilt to maintain control. If I stayed out past 9 o'clock, she'd call sobbing about her anxiety, how she couldn't sleep, how I was literally killing her with stress. If I didn't answer her calls within minutes, she'd track my location and appear wherever I was. Once, she used Find My iPhone to ambush me at a movie theater because I'd silenced my phone during the film. Dad never intervened. He'd disappear behind his newspaper or suddenly remember urgent work in his garage workshop. Travis learned early that aligning with Mom meant smooth sailing, so he'd pile on too. They'd gang up on me during dinner, criticizing everything from my career aspirations to my clothing choices to the way I styled my hair. I met Brandon Clark when I was 24 at a coffee shop where I worked part-time between college classes. He was compassionate, patient, and treated me like an actual human being with valid thoughts and opinions worth hearing. We dated for 2 years before he proposed at the Japanese garden downtown. My mother despised him from the very first introduction. He's not good enough for you, she'd declare, which was ironic coming from someone who'd spent my entire existence telling me I wasn't good enough for anything. What's wrong with him? I'd challenge her. He's just not right. He doesn't earn enough money. His family has issues. You can do so much better. Brandon made excellent money as a software developer. His family was warm and wonderfully normal. The real problem was that Mom couldn't manipulate him, and by extension, couldn't control me when I was with him. The first time Brandon stood up to her was at a 4th of July barbecue. Mom had been making passive-aggressive comments about my weight all afternoon, suggesting I shouldn't have seconds of potato salad. Brandon finally said firmly, "Helen, Charlotte looks beautiful. Maybe we could talk about something else." The expression on my mother's face was pure, undiluted hatred. She didn't speak to either of us for the remainder of the day, then called me that night absolutely screaming about how disrespectful and inappropriate Brandon was, how dare he speak to her that way in her own home. We got married anyway in an intimate ceremony at a vineyard in Willamette Valley. Mom attended our wedding, but she spent the entire reception telling anyone within earshot that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Dad just looked uncomfortable and said nothing, as always. Travis sided with Mom naturally, calling Brandon a dead-end loser, even though Travis himself was 32 years old and still living in our parents' guest house rent-free. Things deteriorated rapidly after the wedding. Mom would call me 20 times a day. She'd arrive at our apartment completely unannounced, sometimes with a key she'd somehow copied without permission. She demanded Brandon and I attend family dinners 4 times weekly, where she'd spend every single minute criticizing him. "Brandon, don't you think you should be earning more by now with your degree? Brandon, when are you going to pursue a real career with upward mobility? Brandon, I noticed your Honda has a scratch on the bumper. Can't even maintain your vehicle properly. Brandon handled it with more grace than I could muster. He'd smile politely and redirect the conversation, but I could see it eroding him. One night after a particularly vicious dinner, he held my hand and said quietly, "Charlotte, I love you more than anything, but we desperately need to establish boundaries with your mom. This situation isn't healthy for either of us." He was absolutely right, but I was terrified of the inevitable explosion that would follow. The worst part was watching Dad and Travis sit there nodding along with whatever poison Mom was spewing. Dad would occasionally mumble half-heartedly, "Now Helen, take it easy," but it carried no weight whatsoever. Travis actively enjoyed the torment, smirking whenever Mom landed a particularly cruel insult. I attempted setting boundaries. I genuinely tried. I told Mom she needed to call before visiting. She showed up anyway and threw a screaming tantrum when I wouldn't unlock the door. I told her the constant degradation of Brandon needed to stop immediately. She cried hysterically and accused me of choosing a man over my own mother. I reduced our mandatory dinners to once weekly. She told our entire extended family I was abandoning them. When I discovered I was pregnant, I felt overwhelming joy. Brandon was ecstatic beyond words. I deliberately waited until I was 3 months along before telling my family because I knew it would trigger complications. I was right. You're pregnant. Mom said when I broke the news over dinner at their house, her voice dripping with disdain and disbelief. Are you completely insane? Mom, we're married. We want children. This is wonderful news. Wonderful? You can barely take care of yourself. And with Brandon as the father? That poor child doesn't stand a chance at a decent life. Dad methodically cut his steak and said absolutely nothing. Travis laughed cruelly and added, "Yeah, good luck with that disaster." "We're excited," I stated firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "And we'd really appreciate your support during this time." Support. Mom stood abruptly from the table, her chair scraping loudly. "I'll tell you what I support. I support you leaving that parasite and coming back home where you belong. Raise the baby here with people who actually love you and can provide proper guidance." Brandon loves me. Brandon is a leech. He trapped you with this pregnancy intentionally. Can't you see his manipulation? I left that dinner in tears, my hands shaking as I drove home. Brandon held me that night on our couch and promised everything would be okay, that we'd get through this together. But Mom's campaign didn't stop. It intensified dramatically. She started texting me articles about successful single mothers who'd left toxic relationships. She'd send messages like, "It's never too late to make the right choice for you and your baby." She told our extended family that Brandon was abusive, a complete fabrication. My Aunt Victoria called me crying hysterically, begging me to leave him for my safety. When I explained that Mom was lying, Aunt Victoria didn't believe me. "Your mother would never lie about something this serious," she insisted. Mom even called Brandon's workplace attempting to get him fired. She told his supervisor that Brandon was mentally unstable and dangerous around others. Fortunately, Brandon's boss knew his character well enough to dismiss it entirely, but it was absolutely humiliating and devastating. Brandon came home that evening looking exhausted and deeply hurt. "Your mom called my office today," he said quietly, sitting down heavily. "What did she tell them?" "She told Mr. Richardson I was violent and that you were terrified of me." He laughed it off because he knows better, "But Charlotte, this is spiraling completely out of control." "I know. I'm so incredibly sorry. You don't need to apologize for her behavior, but we need to take action. This cannot continue, especially with our baby coming soon." The real explosion happened when I was 6 months pregnant. Mom had been calling me all morning repeatedly, and I'd been ignoring her calls because I had a scheduled OB/GYN appointment. She knew about the appointment because I'd mentioned it the previous week during a tense phone conversation. After the appointment, Brandon had to drive straight to an important client meeting. So I decided to grab lunch at a sandwich place downtown on Morrison Street. I was walking along the sidewalk, looking at my phone at the new ultrasound pictures, when I heard her voice cutting through the street noise. "Charlotte." I turned and saw Mom storming toward me with fury blazing in her eyes. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I went to your apartment building. Brandon said you were at the doctor. Why didn't you inform me you were going?" "I did tell you last week." You weren't invited to come along. Mom, it was just a routine checkup. Brandon accompanied me. Of course he did. He's isolating you from your family systematically. Can't you see his manipulation? People were starting to stare at us. I felt my face getting hot with embarrassment. He's not isolating me. You're suffocating me. There's a significant difference. Don't you dare speak to me that way. I'm your mother. I gave you life and I can. You can what? That's when she grabbed my arm hard, her fingernails digging into my skin. You need to leave him right now. Today. Pack your things immediately and come home with me. I'm not leaving my husband. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. She started physically pulling me. I tried jerking away, but her grip was iron tight. We were right at the corner of Morrison and Fifth Avenue, an extremely busy intersection with constant traffic. You're coming with me right this second, she hissed through clenched teeth. Let go of me. That's when she shoved me hard with both hands. I stumbled backward off the curb and into the street. There was a car coming directly at me, a silver Camry. I remember the blaring horn, the screech of brakes. Someone in the crowd screamed. I fell onto the pavement and everything shifted into slow motion. The car stopped mere inches from my body. The driver jumped out, absolutely panicked. Are you okay? Oh my God, are you okay? Someone call 911. I was on my hands and knees in the middle of the street, my heart pounding so violently I thought it would explode. My pregnant belly had hit the ground. I looked up and saw my mother standing on the sidewalk, her face twisted with rage, not concern, not horror, pure rage. You pushed me into the street. I'm 6 months pregnant. You should have thought about that before you defied me. If you won't leave Brandon, then maybe losing that baby will teach you some respect. Mom, there are cars everywhere. I don't care. The driver who'd almost hit me was already calling 911, his hands shaking. A crowd had gathered around us. Someone was recording everything on their phone, holding it up to capture the entire scene. My mother seemed to suddenly realize she'd crossed an irreversible line because her expression abruptly changed to fake concern, like flipping a switch. Sweetie, I didn't push you. You stumbled on the curb. Let me help you up, honey. Don't touch me, I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline and fear. Don't you dare touch me. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics checked me over thoroughly. Miraculously, the baby was fine, and so was I, just scraped palms and a bruised knee. But I was shaken to my absolute core, trembling uncontrollably. The paramedic, a compassionate woman named Gloria, held my hand gently and said, Honey, we see a lot of things in this job, but what your mama just did. That's not normal family conflict. That's not okay under any circumstances. The police took detailed statements from everyone. The driver confirmed my mom had deliberately pushed me. 2 other witnesses confirmed it independently. One of them approached me and said they'd send me the video they'd captured. It clearly showed everything, my mother grabbing me trying to pull away, and then the unmistakable deliberate shove into traffic. Mom tried desperately to spin the narrative. She's being overdramatic. She lost her balance on the curb. I was trying to steady her, actually. But the evidence was irrefutable. The video showed everything with complete clarity, her grabbing me aggressively, me attempting to break free, and then the intentional shove with both hands. The police officer told me I could press charges for assault and reckless endangerment. I was absolutely terrified of the implications, but I did it. My own mother was formally charged with assault and reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman. Brandon met me at the hospital emergency room. When I told him what had happened, every drop of color drained from his face. She could have killed you both, he whispered, holding me carefully like I might shatter. I know. We're pressing charges, right? Please tell me we're pressing charges. Yes. Absolutely yes. Good. This ends right now. No more chances. Dad called me that very night, his voice strained. Charlotte, honey, you need to drop these charges immediately. Your mother didn't mean it. She's just worried about you and the baby. She pushed me into traffic, Dad. I could have lost the baby. I could have died right there in the street. She was emotional and overwhelmed. You know how she gets sometimes. Family doesn't press charges against family, Charlotte. Family doesn't try to murder family members, Dad. He hung up on me. Travis sent me a barrage of vicious texts calling me a vindictive witch and accusing me of tearing our family apart over nothing. According to him, I was deliberately ruining Mom's life over an accident. I blocked both of them without hesitation. Mom hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and fought the charges aggressively. Her lawyer painted me as a rebellious, ungrateful daughter fabricating dramatic stories for attention. But the video evidence was absolutely damning. You could hear her words with perfect clarity. If you won't leave Brandon, then maybe losing that baby will teach you some respect. The court case dragged on for 3 agonizing months. During that time, Mom tried every manipulation tactic imaginable. She had Travis call me repeatedly, begging me to reconsider and drop the charges. She deployed flying monkeys from her social circle, people I barely knew, telling me I was being unnecessarily cruel to my poor mother. She even had her pastor call, despite me not attending that church in years, asking me to show Christian forgiveness and mercy. I stood absolutely firm. I would not back down. Mom accepted a plea deal, mandatory anger management classes, 2 years probation, and a permanent restraining order keeping her at least 500 feet away from me at all times. But that wasn't remotely the end of it. Mom launched a comprehensive whisper campaign throughout the community. She told everyone at her interior design firm that I was an unstable, ungrateful daughter who'd fabricated the entire incident for attention. She told our relatives that I was mentally ill and that Brandon was manipulating and controlling me. Some people believed her version. My cousin Stephanie stopped returning my calls. My uncle Raymond sent me a harsh letter saying I should be ashamed of destroying my mother's life and reputation. But others didn't believe her lies. Aunt Victoria, after finally watching the video evidence, called me sobbing with heartfelt apologies. Mom's younger sister, my Aunt Colleen, reached out and said she dealt with Mom's controlling manipulative behavior for decades and believed me completely. Colleen told me disturbing stories about growing up with my mom over coffee one afternoon. When I was 17, I wanted to attend college out of state, Colleen shared, her hands wrapped around her mug. Your mom told our parents I was using drugs. She actually planted pills in my bedroom. I almost didn't get to go pursue my education. She did what? That's exactly who she is, Charlotte. She absolutely cannot stand anyone having a life she doesn't completely control. I'm so sorry you had to learn this truth this way, under these circumstances. I gave birth to a healthy baby girl 3 months later. We named her Vivian. Brandon and I deliberately decided not to inform Mom when I went into labor. We didn't want her anywhere near the hospital during this precious moment. But somehow, she discovered it anyway. Mom showed up at the hospital maternity ward and attempted to force her way into my room. Hospital security stopped her immediately because of the active restraining order. She caused an enormous scene in the hallway, screaming about her legal rights as a grandmother, threatening lawsuits. The hospital threatened to call the police, and she finally left, still shouting threats. The nurse later informed me that Mom had been calling the maternity ward every single hour for 2 solid days, trying to extract information about me and the baby. After that incident, I changed my phone number completely. We moved to a different neighborhood across town. I made it explicitly clear to any family members still in contact with me that if they gave Mom any information whatsoever about us, they'd be permanently cut off too. Aunt Colleen understood completely and became our only family connection on my side. Here's where karma began doing its beautiful work. Mom's interior design career started collapsing. Word spread throughout the community about what she'd done, partly because local news had picked up the story. Interior designer charged with pushing pregnant daughter into traffic, made for compelling headlines. Her professional reputation imploded overnight. Clients cancelled projects. Her design firm quietly terminated her contract. She attempted starting her own independent practice, but nobody wanted to work with her. She burned through her substantial savings desperately trying to maintain appearances. Meanwhile, Dad, who'd enabled her toxic behavior for 30 years, filed for divorce. He told Aunt Colleen he was exhausted from living with her poison, tired of pretending everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. I should have protected you, Dad told me when we finally talked months after Vivian was born, his voice breaking. I was a complete coward. I'm so sorry, Charlotte. It was far too little, far too late, but I appreciated the acknowledgement of his failures. We built a careful, distant relationship after that conversation. Travis, still living in the guest house, suddenly had to deal with Mom's complete attention and control focused entirely on him. Without me to obsess over, she redirected all her manipulation toward him. Within 2 months, he couldn't tolerate it anymore and moved out. He also went low contact with her. He never apologized to me directly, but Aunt Colleen said he'd admitted privately that he finally understood what I'd endured all those years. Mom ended up having to sell the family house she'd been so incredibly proud of, the one she'd decorated immaculately. She moved into a small studio apartment and got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. Her entire social circle evaporated. The friends who'd once admired her perfect family facade wanted absolutely nothing to do with her once they knew the truth. She tried reaching out through an attorney, demanding visitation rights with Vivian. We fought it aggressively in court and won decisively. The judge reviewed the restraining order, the assault conviction, and her complete lack of remorse or accountability, and denied her petition entirely. The judge even noted in her written decision that my mother had demonstrated no accountability whatsoever for her dangerous actions and posed a clear potential threat to the child's safety. Last I heard from Aunt Colleen, Mom is alone. Travis talks to her occasionally out of guilty obligation, but even he maintains significant distance. Dad remarried a wonderful woman named Caroline who's gentle, kind, and supportive, everything Mom never was. Vivian is now 3 years old and absolutely thriving. She's curious, joyful, and surrounded by love. She'll never know the grandmother who tried to hurt her before she was even born. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to my mother's life. I don't. Not even slightly. My mother made her own choices deliberately. She chose control over genuine love, manipulation over mutual respect, and violence over acceptance. She systematically destroyed her own life by absolutely refusing to let me live mine authentically. Brandon and I are doing wonderfully. We bought a beautiful house with a big backyard. I went back to school and earned my teaching degree. Our life isn't perfect, no life is, but it's genuinely ours. Built on mutual respect, trust, and authentic love. Not control, fear, and manipulation. If your parent tried to harm you and your unborn child out of pure spite, then faced devastating consequences that ruined their entire life, would you ever consider letting them back in? Or is some damage simply permanent and unforgivable?